Hi, what I want to talk to you today is about iPhone photography or mobile phone photography, using your phone around the house to create images for your portfolio. Some of us may only have this, and that's absolutely fine because we can accomplish the portfolio images with one of these and a bit of creative thinking. The images that I've taken, I've used the standard camera app initially just to show that it can be done without purchasing apps of manual control, etc. And I've taken some, tried to fit the brief just around my house, interior, not gone outside or anything like that, um, just to see what we could get. Before we look at the images, I just want to talk about photographing with your iPhone and sort of like the best practices, that sort of thing. One key thing is keeping it as stable as possible when you're photographing, and usually, when you're photographing, you tend to hold it, you're making points of contact with finger and thumb, and you're holding it and you're tapping the shutter, and that's kind of, you know, waving the phone around. On most devices, Apple, Samsung, a lot, you can actually use one of the volume switches as a shutter if you didn't already know. So you can actually take the phone quite steadily in two hands and use the bottom, or if you have it this way around, you can use your finger to press down and take the picture, therefore providing a much stable camera position for taking your images. The other thing, and I only learned this recently myself, was that when you're focusing on your touch screen and tapping to focus your image, if you hold down on it, it will actually lock the focus point and the exposure. So you can actually move the phone, adjust the position, the composition of your image there, and you don't get the phone trying to recalibrate the exposure or refocus before you take the picture. So that's just out of the native inbuilt app. Obviously, if you buy any of the apps that provide manual control, you can then set things like shutter, aperture, ISO, white balance, etc. And as we've seen from the Snapseed talk, there's lots of adjustments you can make afterwards within the device itself on the images as well. So let's take a look at some of the stuff I shot around the house to fit the brief. Taking my portfolio images using just my mobile phone. I'm going to just talk through the images that I've taken, some of the thinking behind them, and so on. The first thing I want to go through though was this is an iPhone X photo loaded up in Affinity Photo, and if I go to the develop persona, much like with any of my cameras, if I go to the metadata and exit, I can get all the technical information here regarding this photograph. So again, if you load up your mobile phone images, you'd have to transfer them to your computer. You can load them up into Affinity Photo and find your technical detail like you would any other image in the metadata tab. Okay, now I'm just going to look up, bring up my portfolio, and I'm just going to talk through the images that I shot or created. Sorry, the images that I created, and I'm going to start here with leading lines for the front cover. And this was the only image that I really had planned out as something that I would create from scratch. So a lot of the other images I'd sort of seen, work the angles, posed, place things around, but this was the one where I thought, yep, I've got some train track. Well, daughter's got some train track in a box. I will build a leading line across the image and leave that negative space for text, etc. So, and what I did was I did a little play about building these out into different shapes, different lines, placing the train here at different angles, different points to try and create a bit of narrative. Felt like towards the right hand third going out of the frame was far enough over to give a sense of travel and movement. Not the biggest fan of this background, this grey rug, but compared to everything else that I've got in the house, it was just sort of giving me a nice base for choosing my colours of fonts or my typography and things like that. And I've left enough space for things like details about module convener, module codes, name, logos, etc. So that'll all fit in quite nicely around there. The next shot is negative space. Do apologise if you hear me wincing, it's because I pulled my back, so every time I move I wince in pain. But going back to this one, this negative space, and this is the back wall of my office. And what surprised me about this was the fact that there's a bit of a narrative, a bit of a story going on here, and that you can see that there's a nice soft chair, big open space next to it, and you can just imagine that if somebody was sitting here, it gives them room for thoughts. You could almost imagine the thought bubbles coming out the head while they process things or think about things, etc. It's a chair in the corner, a quiet corner of the office room. So the office room is about 10 feet wide. There's not a lot of space, but there's just this quiet space here where you can sit with your notebook and think about projects, think about work, think about what needs doing. And I think you get that sort of sense from this image that you can sit in this quiet, calm space due to this open, negative space. Framing was one of the ones that I struggled with because at first I didn't want to go to sort of blatant and then use windows. I was looking around for things that would work, and I even looked at things like the doll's house, like opening the door and having a figurine or something and lighting it. But sometimes the simplistic ideas are the ones that you think, oh, maybe that's just a bit too obvious. They're the strongest ones, And when I took this photo, I took it and I thought, right, okay, that's a safety shot in the bag. And I look at other framing options. When I brought it up into the computer, I actually really started to like it more. And it's not so much the picture, the main image that the back over the back of the house is out the window, but I really like these little flourishes, like these little lines of light on the curtains here. So it's not just dropped out to black, but there's these little lines of flourish here. There's these little pools of light on the radiator that just help strengthen that frame up. And even the little imperfections as well, like for example, the window isn't properly closed, but I like that handle being a sort of diagonal. I think if it was closed, everything would just be a bit too rigid, and it just throws in there a nice little distraction for the viewer to look at. Shape. This is quite a prominent shape that I have in my kitchen, but this was probably actually the hardest image to do technically because of it's high up on the wall. It's quite dark in that corner of the kitchen, and yeah, I had to sort of like reach up with the phone and try and hold it as steady as possible. So it's not the sharpest image I've taken, but after a little bit of light processing in terms of boosting the saturation and the contrast, it's come out quite nicely. And we've got a very nice solid shape against a coloured background there. So it does the fit for purpose for the portfolio. Texture was a happy accident actually because I had some towels and bits and pieces out in the washing line, and so I had a really nice soft light coming in from the side because it was later on in the afternoon, and I thought, oh, that's perfect for texture. And this was a happy accident in that the focal point actually missed what I was initially shooting for. And when I was reviewing it, I actually decided to keep it because I thought that it was actually giving us more of an in-depth look at the texture of this this towel. It's a drain. We don't have a drain board in the kitchen, so it's like a towel. It's like a drying mat basically for dishes and stuff. But the fact that you get all these sort of fibers and stitching in between the toweling parts come out really nicely. You can actually get a good sense, a good detail there of how that feels, and you get a sense of the texture of that. And again, like I said, the lighting was fantastic, and the autofocus the focus point just missed. Probably I just tapped on the screen for the focus point, but it actually, I think having this as the more prominent texture is actually better than having these parts here as the prominent texture. So a happy accident that worked there.
Communications. I'm always being shouted at by women in my house, whether it's the wife, the child, or the cat, or the tortoise. There's always a female shouting at me, and at this time it was the cat. You know, wanting to be fed or want some fresh water. Um, she's an old lady, so she shouts. She's about 20. So what I was doing was I was trying to get a photograph of her shouting at me, but every time I lifted up the camera, she just did the thing of half smiling, half closing her eyes at me, which again is a communication trait with pet cats that just sort of communicate with me with the long blinks. And when I lifted the camera away, she'd start shouting at me again. So I couldn't quite get the one with her mouth open, but there's still this communication between her and the viewer. So that was a nice one to get. I initially was going to shoot this for color, just because of the vibrancies of the coffee, tea, and sugar pots. But looking through the grouping, it was a much stronger image for grouping. And I think it was after listening to David's talk and reading David's PDF about grouping, about looking for the connection, the overall connection in grouping that helps. And what I liked about this was the fact that although these could be three individual jars, they do have some similar style, but they're not exactly the same. It's not the same font used in every jar. It's not the same color, but there is that connection, and that's coffee, tea, and sugar. It's your typical kitchen storage jars. There is a bit of a connecting overall theme and purpose, but there's individuality in each of the jars. So it was an effective grouping shot without them all being the same. I mean, my initial thought was, oh, maybe a bunch of rubber ducks on the bath or something like that, or floating in the water. But when I saw this, I thought, well, actually, there's more of a narrative here because there's this more to explore. They're not, if they'd all been exactly the same design and style, you maybe wouldn't look at it as much. But because they are grouped, they are under a joint purpose. They all have their own individual style and design and fonts and colors and illustrations, etc. So there's a lot to explore in the image. Diminishing sequence. This is probably the one I overthought the most in terms of the narrative that I was trying to build, and it's maybe it was just me. I don't know, but when I look at some of these images and my mind starts to wander about what it's saying, what the message is there. So this isn't my pill caddy, my medication caddy, or anything like this. It's my vitamin caddy, just to make it easier for me and my wife to grab our vitamins each day. It also makes it easier for her to open it up and see when I haven't taken my vitamins, and then for her to nag at me. But what I liked about this was the fact that the diminishing sequence provides a little bit of a narrative, a little bit of a thought process if you go as deep as I did, which looking at it, if I was looking at this, I think like Friday is in focus. The word Friday is in focus. This is the one that's nice and clear. And to me, that suggests that this photo was perhaps taken on a Friday, or it's trying to show that Friday is the present day. Saturday's still to come because we read left to right. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They're blurred out. They're back in the distance. They're in the past. I tried to like flip it around and you could go sort of future wise, but I just felt like, you know, the days diminishing into the distance were the ones that were done where they were in the past, and we were leading up to the present, which is in focus, which is Friday, with Saturday to come. And sometimes these simple images, like if you just let people's minds wander or daydream about what the story is, narrative is, you can come up with quite interesting little thoughts. As you've seen when David and I have given feedback on your images, that we can both look at images and start to build up different stories in our minds. And I think that's always a very fun part of photography. Color, just there's some random toys around my house, and I just happened to be sitting and looked down at a little one and thrown down this inflatable flamingo she has, and the color just jumps right out. So in terms of technique, it's right there, a nice bright color against a dark background. That even this blue here stands out as an odd colour as well, because you've got black in design and you've got dark colours on the wood, and then this vibrancy of this neon pink, but then this blue sticks out to me just as much. So I thought that was a nice shot of colour. Repeating elements was another hard image to do. You'd think it might be just quite simple. Find a flower head, stick it in front of a window for a big light source, and shoot it. But when I first initially tried to do this, I kept creating shadows. I couldn't quite get the lighting angle correct, so I had to put the flower head aside, make sure it was fine for the night, and then come back the next day and shoot it a little bit earlier in the day when the light was a bit more prominent in the window, where I could get the angle where I wasn't going to create shadows across the top of it. So it took a little bit of this image actually took longer than any other ones, just because I had to come back to it and position it. So although it was very simple, flower head on top of the coffee table, that juxtaposition of wooden texture and the flower and vibrancy of the colours, the window light was harder to control and manipulate. So therefore, I had to take a couple of attempts at it just to get the right type of lighting. And one of the nice things is that I've got blinds in the front window, so I was able to control and direct some of that lighting. So there was a few test shots where it was a bit harsher, etc. But this one was the one that came out quite nice. And finally, we have pattern. And again, I like the idea of the layers to this one, and that the pattern is something that's man-made. We build houses, and this is obviously a doll's house, so it's like a built-up model of something that we build in terms of a house. And there's a uniformity of the windows, the pattern happening there, and also the extra layer of the fact that the little one's bedroom is decorated with these vinyl stickers of a birch tree forest with birds and stuff like that. So it almost looks like the house has surroundings as well. And that is actually where I found the house. I didn't set that up or put that there. It was just something that, as I was wandering around the house, I found the little one's dollhouse sitting there against those tree stickers. I thought, that's a bit more interesting. So, and the skirting board then looks like a wall, and you just get these different layers unintentionally sometimes. And then as you start to break it down, you get more out of your image that is sometimes quite simply. So this is just me lying on the floor, phone in portrait mode, and taking a picture of the doll's house, but we've got different layers going on. So the grey carpet is almost like the driveway. You've got the wall, and in the back of the house, you've got trees and birds, and they're all out of proportion and weird. But it's one of those things, like if you kind of squint, you can almost see what it's trying to become. So there's a lot you can get out of your iPhone, because you can get these phones into these devices, these cameras, into angles that cameras won't go, or views they won't go. You can get shots a bit easier, top-down shots, etc., because you can hold it a bit easier. So there's lots of creativity to explore with your mobile camera. And all these images were shot with the standard app, and they've only had a little bit of cropping done in Affinity Photo. There's not any sort of sharpening, or I think on the clock one I've just boosted that yellow just a little bit, but these are as they came out of the standard built-in camera app. So I could go back and tidy these up a little bit more, tweak the colouring, etc., and I could get a bit more out of them. But for most of them I won't have to. They are fine as they are. So a bit of preparation beforehand. Make sure your surfaces are clean. Make sure your angles are going to work, and that a lot of the stuff you'll shoot with your phone in your house will be more detailed shots, more close-up stuff, because it is quite a wide-angle camera, and you run the risk of getting a lot of things in the background and clutter and stuff like that. So it takes a little bit more work cleaning up the frame and getting exactly just what you want to get. But there's lots to achieve there with just your mobile device in creating this portfolio. So yeah, good luck with that.